AITA for stopping paying the mortgage after my parents left the house to my sister? I'm Kobe, 40, and for most of my adult life, I was the son my parents called when something was already on fire. By the time this happened, my wife Elena and I had been married for 10 years, had a 6-year-old daughter who still taped her drawings to our fridge with crooked magnets, and had spent enough money rescuing my parents' house that I stopped opening bank statements in front of Elena. That last part sounds worse than it was, but only because I spent years convincing myself there was a difference between hiding something and avoiding a conversation I already knew would be unpleasant. Elena always knew when I sent my parents money. I never drained an account behind her back, forged her signature, or lied about where it went. But there were plenty of times I would make a transfer and wait until after our daughter was asleep to mention it, because I knew Elena would ask the question I had no good answer for. What's the plan? Not, why are you helping them? Not, choose me or your parents. Just, what's the plan? And for years my answer was some version of, they just need to get through this month. My parents, Teresa and Howard, were never cartoonishly irresponsible. That would have been easier. They were the kind of people who could explain every bad decision in a way that sounded reasonable if you only looked at that decision by itself. A medical deductible they had not planned for. A car repair. A property tax increase. A stretch where their income dropped. A credit card balance they had moved around too long. A plumbing problem that should have been fixed 6 months earlier. A mortgage payment that became 2, then 3, because once they were behind, every new expense made the old one harder to catch up on. There was always a story. Most of the stories were even true. The pattern was the problem. My younger sister, Brianna, 34, had her own pattern. She had gone through a painful divorce, carried debt from that period, and moved several times afterward. None of that was fake either. She had a harder few years than I did, and my parents built an entire family philosophy around that fact. Brianna was the one who needed grace. I was the one who could handle things. If she missed a bill, she was overwhelmed. If I objected to covering it, I was forgetting that I was her older brother. If she moved back in with our parents for a while, she was rebuilding. If I said I could not pay for a repair at the same time, my father would tell me, "You're the stable one. We need you to think bigger than yourself." When we were younger, I actually liked being the reliable one. There is a certain pride in being the person people trust. If my parents needed someone to drive them somewhere, fix a problem, read a document, make a call, or come up with money before a deadline, I could usually do it. What I did not notice soon enough was that reliability had stopped being something they appreciated and become something they budgeted around. The house was the biggest example. It was the house Brianna and I grew up in. I knew every stupid sound it made. The upstairs hallway creaked in the same place it had when I was 12. One kitchen cabinet never closed unless you lifted the door slightly. My father had marked our heights on the inside of a laundry room doorframe until my mother painted over them and cried about it for a week. So when my father called me 3 years before the trust mess and said they were seriously behind on the mortgage, I did not see a line item. I saw the house. I also saw my parents losing it. They had already received notices. My father tried to make it sound manageable, but when I pressed him for numbers, it was not manageable. They were deep enough behind that catching up required more than tightening the budget for a month. Elena was sitting across from me at our kitchen table when I told her. "How much?" she asked. $31,600. She stared at me. $31,600. I nodded. She leaned back and folded her arms. "Do they have any of it?" "Some. Not enough." "Are they asking us for the whole amount?" "They're asking me to help cure the arrears before it gets worse." Elena looked toward the fridge. Our daughter had 3 drawings taped to it at the time, all held up by magnets that seemed determined to slide sideways. One was supposed to be our family standing in front of a purple house with a sun almost as big as the roof. Then Elena looked back at me. "I'm not saying no," she said. "I'm asking whether this is help or whether we're becoming part of their mortgage." I told her it was a one-time rescue. I believed that when I said it. We covered the arrears. My parents were emotional about it. My mother cried on the phone. My father got quiet in the way he did when he did not want anyone to notice he was embarrassed. "You saved this house," my mother told me. My father said, "You're not throwing money away. One day this place is how we make some of this right with you." I did not ask him exactly what that meant. That was my first major mistake. I did not want a contract. I did not want to make my parents feel like debtors. I did not want to turn an ugly family emergency into a negotiation over who got what when they died. So I heard what I wanted to hear. The house would stay in the family. My help was being remembered. This was not just money disappearing. For a while, things improved. Then there were property taxes. Then there were a few mortgage shortfalls. Then my mother called and said there was a problem with the roof. By that point, Elena had started asking for documentation every time money came up. Not because she thought my parents were lying about the repair. The roof was obviously failing. My mother sent pictures of water damage near a bedroom window, and I went over there myself and saw where the ceiling had started staining after heavy rain. Elena wanted documentation because the total was getting too large to treat like casual family help. Get the invoice, she told me. Get the tax receipt. Save the transfers. I don't care if your dad thinks it's rude. He's going to say I'm treating this like a business. It is our money, Kobe. They're my parents. And I'm your wife. She did not raise her voice when she said it. That made it land harder. Then she added, helping them is one thing. Pretending our money does not matter is another. I remember being irritated with her for about 10 seconds, not because she was wrong, but because she was saying out loud what I had been avoiding. So I started keeping better records. By the time everything blew up, the full amount Elena and I had put toward that house was $74,000. I know that number exactly because I built a spreadsheet later and checked it against our bank history twice. $31,600 to cure the original mortgage arrears. $10,400 in regular mortgage support during months my parents came up short. $13,300 in property taxes across multiple payments. $18,700 for the roof. $74,000. Some of that had been given when my parents were genuinely in a crisis. Some had been given because once you save something expensive, it becomes psychologically difficult to stop saving it. That is a trap I understand much better now. Every new payment made the previous ones feel like a reason to make the next one. If I did not cover the taxes, what had the arrears money been for? If I let the roof worsen, what had the tax money protected? If I stopped helping with the mortgage, was I going to watch the place slip back toward the same problem we had spent so much fixing? My parents understood that logic too, whether consciously or not. My mother had a very particular way of asking for money. She never opened with a number. She would text, "Are you busy, honey?" Or, "Can I ask you something without you getting stressed?" Or, "Your father doesn't want me bothering you, but..." Then the amount would arrive 3 messages later wrapped in enough tenderness to make saying no feel like correcting someone for telling you they loved you. My father used a different approach. He hated talking about money directly, so he talked about duty. This is how families survive. You help where you're strong. Your sister needs room to get steady. You're already steady. Once, after Elena asked whether my parents had written down anywhere that our contributions would be recognized, I brought it up with him. He frowned like I had insulted him. "Don't turn family into a contract," he said. I let the subject drop. That sentence became pretty interesting later. There were other things I noticed without putting them together. My mother stopped saying the house would make things right with me. Instead, she started saying things like, "You and Elena are doing fine. You don't need much from us." When I paid one of the property tax bills, she specifically asked me not to mention the amount to Brianna because she's already under enough pressure. That annoyed Elena. "Why is the person not paying the bill the one being protected from hearing about the bill?" she asked. I told her not to make it bigger than it was. Another time, Brianna was at my parents' house when I stopped by. She was talking about how exhausting it was to keep moving and said, "At least I know this place is my safety net." I assumed she meant our parents would always let her stay there if she needed to. I did not ask what she meant because, again, I had spent years learning how to smooth over family discomfort instead of examining it. The last major payment I made before finding out the truth was the roof. The estimate was ugly but reasonable for the work involved. I paid the contractor directly, not my parents. Elena insisted on that, and I agreed. A few weeks later, there was another property tax issue. Not the full $13,300 total, but one of the larger chunks within it. My mother called me sounding embarrassed. I covered it. Then, not long after that, my Aunt Celeste called me about something completely unrelated. Celeste is my mother's younger sister. She was usually the person who tried to keep peace without pretending no one had done anything wrong. She had defended my mother to me and me to my mother, which is probably why people kept telling her things they should have handled themselves. We were talking about my parents when she said, almost casually, "I know the house situation is awkward now, but I'm sure your parents thought they were doing the right thing for Brianna." I was standing at our kitchen counter. "What house situation?" I asked. There was a pause. Not a dramatic pause. Just long enough for me to hear that she had realized she knew something I did not. Celeste said, "I thought Teresa told you." "Told me what?" Another pause. "Kobe, I really don't want to be in the middle of this." "You're already in the middle if you know something about the house that I don't." She sighed. Then she told me she understood that my parents had amended their trust so Brianna would receive the house. I did not yell. I did not even know what question to ask first. I just looked at the fridge. One of our daughter's drawings had slipped sideways because the magnet was crooked. It was such a normal thing to notice that it made the conversation feel unreal. "When?" I asked. "I don't know the exact date." "Recently?" "I don't think so." "How long have you known?" Celeste hesitated again. "Since last year." That was the moment the entire problem changed for me. If my parents had changed the trust last week after some argument, I would still have been angry, but at least the sequence would have made sense. We fight. They decide I am not getting the house. I stop paying for it. But since last year meant there was overlap. A lot of overlap. I asked Celeste exactly what my mother had told her. She said Teresa had explained that Brianna needed permanent security, while Elena and I already had stability. Celeste had assumed I knew because, in her words, there was no way they would keep taking your money without telling you that. I almost laughed. I did not blame Celeste. I could hear how uncomfortable she was. Before we ended the call, she said, "Kobe, for what it's worth, I told your mother this was going to be a problem if it wasn't discussed openly." That did not make me feel better. I called my parents that evening. My mother answered, "Hi, honey. Did you change the trust so Brianna gets the house?" Silence. Then my mother said, "Who told you?" "Not, what are you talking about?" "Not, no. Who told you?" I said, "So it's true." "Kobe, it's more complicated than that." "How?" "Your sister needs security." I could hear my father in the background asking what was happening. A second later, he was on speaker. He said, "What's this about?" I repeated the question. He answered faster than my mother had. "Yes, the house is set to go to Brianna." I said, "And when were you planning to tell me?" My father replied, "It wasn't something that needed to become a family fight." That was such a strange answer that I had to stop for a second. "I've put $74,000 into that house." My mother immediately said, "No one is saying we don't appreciate that. I paid the roof invoice." "We know." "I paid the tax bill." "We know, Kobe. And you changed the trust while I was doing that." My father said, "You're acting like we stole from you." "I'm asking when you changed it." My mother said, "This is exactly why we didn't want to have this conversation when everyone was emotional." I asked again. My father finally said, "Last year." "When last year?" He got irritated. "What difference does the exact month make?" "All the difference." My mother tried to soften it. "You have your life, honey. You have Elena. You have your daughter. You're doing well. Brianna has had so much instability." I said, "That does not answer my question." My father cut in. "The house is ours. We can decide what happens to it." That was true. It was also not the point. I told him, "You absolutely can. And I can decide what happens to my money." My mother started crying then, not loudly, but enough that I could hear her breathing change. "Kobe, don't do this. Don't reduce everything we've been through as a family to dollars." "I'm not reducing it to dollars. I'm asking why you let me keep paying for an asset you had already decided would go entirely to someone else." "You did not lose anything," she said. "You have your own life." That sentence stayed with me. You did not lose anything. As if $74,000 had evaporated from a fictional account. As if Elena had not postponed things she wanted us to do because we had moved money toward my parents. As if some of that money had not come out of savings that existed for our own family security. As if the only thing I could possibly lose was legal title to a house. I asked them to send me the trust amendment. My father immediately resisted. "That's private estate planning." "Then the mortgage is private financial planning," I said. My mother told me not to be sarcastic. I told them I would not send another dollar related to the house unless they gave me the document that explained what I was supposedly helping preserve. The next morning, My mother emailed me scanned pages of the amendment. I read the date 3 times. 11 months. They had changed the trust 11 months before I found out. During those 11 months, I had paid mortgage support, a property tax bill, and the $18,700 roof repair. They had watched me protect an asset they had already decided would go entirely to Brianna. That was the part that broke something for me. Not the inheritance itself. My parents were right about one thing. It was their house, and they could leave it to whomever they wanted. If they had sat me down 11 months earlier and said, "We have decided Brianna gets the house. We still need help, but we understand if that changes what you're willing to contribute," I would have been hurt. I might have been angry. I might still have helped in some limited way, but I would have been making an informed decision. Instead, they had made sure I stayed financially useful while removing the piece of the arrangement they knew mattered to me. I showed Elena the amendment after our daughter went to bed. She read the first page, then the second. "When did they sign this?" she asked. I pointed to the date. She looked at me. "That was before the roof." "Yes." "And before the last tax payment." "Yes." Elena put the pages down very carefully. For a few seconds, she did not say anything. Then she asked, "Do you understand why I kept asking you to get this stuff in writing?" I said, "Yeah." She could have said, "I told you so." She did not. That somehow made it worse. Instead, she said, "I'm not asking you to stop loving them. I'm asking you to stop paying them without a plan." I told her I was done paying anything related to the house. She watched me for a moment and said, "Are you done because you mean it? Or are you done because you're angry tonight?" That question irritated me too. "I mean it." "Good. Then don't make this about getting even. Make it a boundary you can still defend 6 months from now." So that is what I tried to do. I did not call Brianna that night. I did not blast anyone online. I did not threaten my parents with anything. I logged into our bank account and canceled the recurring mortgage transfer I had set up months earlier. Then I sent my parents a text so there would be no confusion. I wrote that I would no longer pay the mortgage, property taxes, repairs, insurance, or other expenses tied to the house. I said any future financial request needed to be made in writing. I also said that if Brianna was going to inherit the house, she needed to be included in whatever plan existed to keep it. My father did not respond. My mother said, "I cannot believe you would do this to us over paperwork." I did not answer. 2 weeks later, she texted me on a Wednesday morning. "Mortgage is due Friday, honey." That was all she wrote. No mention of the trust. No mention of our conversation. No mention of the boundary I had put in writing. Just the same soft tone she had used for years, as if the last 2 weeks had been a temporary mood I was expected to get over before the next bill came due. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Then I typed, "Then the future owner should start practicing." I almost deleted it because it was sharper than the boundary I had intended to keep. I sent it anyway. A minute later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father called. Then Brianna. I did not answer any of them until that evening, when I called my mother back. She opened with, "How could you send me something like that?" I said, "Did you ask Brianna?" "Kobe, she cannot just come up with the whole mortgage payment out of nowhere." "Neither can I. I just got used to doing it because you kept asking." "That is not fair." "What part?" "You know what your sister has been through. I also know what I paid after you changed the trust." My mother became very quiet. Then she said, "We are 70 years old, Kobe." My father was actually 70. My mother was 67. She rounded their ages up when it helped. I said, "I know how old you are. So you are willing to let us fall behind to prove a point?" "I'm willing to stop being the automatic payer for a house you chose to give to someone else." "It is not hers yet." That caught my attention. I said, "Then it should not be my bill now either." The call ended badly. By Monday, the lender's online system had marked the payment past due and my parents had received an automated late notice. It was not a foreclosure notice. No one was being thrown into the street. But if you listened to my relatives that week, you would have thought I had personally arrived with a bulldozer. My aunt on my father's side called me first. She said, "Your mother is beside herself." I asked, "Did she tell you why I stopped paying?" She said, "You're angry about the inheritance." "Did she tell you when they changed it?" There was a pause. "No. Ask her." My cousin Julian called the next day. At first, he was not on my side. Julian is 43, old enough to have opinions he does not need permission to express. He said, "Man, I get why you're pissed, but cutting off the payment without giving them months to adjust is cold. I told him. They had 11 months to adjust. He said, "What do you mean?" So I explained the date on the trust amendment. He got quieter. I told him I had paid the roof after that date. Then the tax bill. Then monthly shortfalls. He said, "They never told you?" "No." "Brianna knew?" "I don't know yet." That was when I realized I needed to stop having the same emotional conversation with 12 different people and verify the entire timeline for myself. I pulled bank records. I downloaded transfer history. I found the roof invoice and payment confirmation. I found property tax receipts. I saved screenshots of my mother asking for money after the trust amendment date. I printed the amendment itself. I went back through messages that I had barely noticed when they were sent and found one from my mother around the time of the tax payment. "Please don't mention this to Brianna. She is already stressed, and I don't want her feeling guilty." At the time, I had read that as my mother protecting Brianna emotionally. Now it looked different. Why would Brianna feel guilty about a tax bill on a house she did not know she was getting? I called Celeste again. I asked one question. "Did Brianna know about the trust change when Mom told you?" Celeste did not answer right away. Then she said, "Yes." That one hurt more than I expected. I had been giving Brianna some benefit of the doubt. I had imagined my parents making a decision for her without involving her, maybe even surprising her with it later. Celeste said the change had come after months of conversations about Brianna's future. According to her, Brianna had been afraid that if my parents left the house equally to both of us, Elena and I would eventually want to sell our share and force a sale. I actually had to ask Celeste to repeat that. Brianna told them Elena and I would force a sale? She said you two would be practical about it, that you wouldn't want money tied up in a house you didn't need. Did she ask them to leave it to her? Celeste said, "I wasn't in every conversation. But yes, Kobe. She wanted the house protected for her." That was enough. Brianna had not simply benefited from my parents' decision. She had helped shape it. I still did not know about the second part until Julian called me again 2 days later. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I should have connected it sooner." Months earlier, before I knew anything about the trust, Brianna had been talking to Julian about money after her divorce and what she might do long-term. Julian said she told him that once the house was hers, she could always sell it and finally start over somewhere else. I asked him exactly what she had said. He said, something like, "Worst case, I can sell the house when the time comes and finally start over." I didn't think much of it because I assumed everybody knew whatever arrangement she was talking about. I sat there with that for a while. The entire justification for cutting me out was that Brianna needed this specific house as permanent stability. My parents had framed it like a moral necessity. She needed roots. She needed security. She needed one thing in the world that could not be taken from her. Meanwhile, she was privately talking about the house as an asset she could liquidate if she wanted a reset. I was not angry that she might someday sell it. If she inherited it, it would be hers. I was angry because she had used the language of permanent security to convince my parents that I should have no share in the very asset I was funding. That evening, Elena found me at the kitchen table with bank statements spread out in front of me. Our daughter was in the other room watching a cartoon. A school reminder and a utility bill were still stuck to the fridge beside her drawings. Elena started taking the bills down. "What are you doing?" I asked. I don't want her asking why we keep talking about money every time she walks in here. I looked toward the living room. We haven't been yelling. No, but she notices more than you think. Elena set the papers on the counter. Then she sat across from me. "You're building a case," she said. "I'm building a timeline. Same difference if your goal is to win. My whole family thinks I'm trying to make my parents homeless because I'm mad about an inheritance. I know. So I'm going to show them what actually happened." Elena nodded slowly. Then she said, "I support you stopping the payments. I support you correcting the story, but I need you to be careful about why you're doing this." I did not like where the conversation was going. She continued anyway. "You've spent years letting them push you past your limit because you wanted to be the good son. Now you're hurt, and I'm worried you're going to push just as hard in the other direction because you want them to feel what you felt." I said, "They lied by omission for 11 months. I know. They took money from us knowing the arrangement had changed. I know. And Brianna helped convince them I'd force a sale. I know. Then what am I supposed to do? Smile and keep this private while they call everyone we're related to?" I didn't say keep it private. Elena leaned forward. I'm saying decide what your boundary is before the confrontation. Otherwise, they're going to drag you into arguing about whether they love you, whether Brianna had it harder, whether you're greedy, whether I poisoned you against them, and you'll walk out still negotiating. That was the most useful thing anyone said to me during the entire mess. So I wrote down the boundary for myself. I would not pay another expense connected to the house. I would not argue about who deserved the inheritance. I would not demand the trust be changed. I would not ask for the $74,000 back as a condition of having a relationship, because I knew most of it was probably unrecoverable and I had given it without a formal repayment agreement. But I would not let anyone call those payments irrelevant either. And I would not let my parents keep presenting the timeline as if I had happily funded them for years and suddenly became vindictive when I learned my sister was getting an inheritance. The sequence mattered. They changed the trust. They did not tell me. They kept asking for money. I found out. I stopped. A few days later, my mother called and said she wanted everyone to clear the air. I almost refused. Then she said Celeste would be there, Julian would be there, Brianna would be there, and a couple of other relatives who had been calling me would also be there. That told me exactly what the meeting was. It was not a private reconciliation. It was an audience. Elena said, "You don't have to go." I said, "If I don't, they'll tell everyone I was afraid to face them." That is not a reason to go. I know. What is? I thought about it. To say it once. In the same room. Then stop. She nodded. That's a reason. Elena came with me, but we agreed beforehand that she was not going to fight my family for me. That mattered to both of us. My mother had already started telling people Elena was encouraging distance. I did not want the night to become a referendum on my wife. When we arrived, the mood was painfully polite. There was food on the table. My mother had made too much of it, which she always did when she was nervous. People kept offering each other drinks, even though no one actually wanted one. Brianna barely looked at me. My father waited until everyone had settled before he started. "I want this handled like adults," he said. I almost pointed out that adults usually tell people when a financial arrangement changes, but I kept my mouth shut. My mother went next. She said she loved both of her children equally. She said no parent should have to justify helping the child who needs more. She said Brianna's divorce and financial instability had left her without the kind of foundation Elena and I had built. Then she said, "Kobe has turned what was always family help into an account he expects us to repay with property." That sentence was well constructed. If I had heard only that version, I might have thought I sounded awful too. My father added, "A child should not charge interest on loyalty." I said, "I'm not charging interest." "That's what this is," he said. "You gave money when we needed it, and now, because the house is going to your sister, you're treating every dollar like an investment." One of my aunts nodded. That was the moral argument against me, and I understood why it worked. No one had forced me to pay the original $31,600. I had done it because I loved my parents and did not want them to lose their home. No contract promised me the house. No document said my $74,000 bought equity. If I pretended otherwise, I would be lying too. So I did not argue that point. I said, "You are allowed to leave the house to Brianna." My mother blinked. My father looked suspicious, like I had skipped a step in the fight he expected. I continued, "I am not asking you to change the trust. I am not asking for half the house. I am not saying you legally owe me the property." Brianna finally looked at me. I said, "I'm saying you changed the arrangement 11 months before I found out, and you kept taking money from me because you knew I might stop if I knew." My mother immediately said, "That is not what happened." I had the papers with me, but I did not throw them on the table like a movie scene. I took out the trust amendment first. This was signed 11 months before Celeste accidentally told me. My father said, "Everyone knows that now." No, everyone knows you changed it. They did not know when. I placed the roof invoice beside it. This was paid after the amendment. Then the property tax receipt. This was after it too. Then I listed the mortgage transfers that came after the amendment date. My mother said, "We needed help. That did not change because of the trust." I said, "Exactly. Your need did not change. My information did." She frowned. I clarified. "You made a decision that affected whether I would keep putting money into that house, and you withheld it." My father said, "It was not a secret. It was a family decision." I asked, which family? He did not answer. I looked at Brianna. Did you know before they signed it? She crossed her arms. This is between you and Mom and Dad. That's not an answer. She said, I knew they were talking about protecting the house for me. Did you tell them Elena and I would force a sale? Her expression changed. Not much, but enough. She looked toward Julian. Julian said, Don't look at me. Answer him. Brianna said, I told them the truth. You're practical. Elena is practical. If you inherited half of a house you didn't need, you would not want your money trapped there forever. Elena remained quiet beside me. I said, You made us sound like a threat to your stability. I said I was scared. You said we would push to sell. Wouldn't you? I have no idea what I would have done because no one ever had that conversation with me. Brianna shook her head. You don't understand what it's like to have everything fall apart. That was the first moment I felt myself getting genuinely angry instead of controlled angry. I said, You think I don't understand instability because I didn't get divorced? I think you've always had options. So have you. One of them has apparently been me paying for a house you plan to inherit. My mother cut in. Stop attacking your sister. I turned to her. I'm asking her what she knew. She has been through enough. There it was again. The family rule. Brianna suffers, so Brianna receives protection. Kobe manages, so Kobe receives responsibility. Brianna's pain creates obligations for everyone else. My limits create disappointment. Brianna said, You have a house. You have a stable marriage. You have savings. I lost my marriage. I spent years moving around. I am tired of always being the one who has less. That was more honest than anything my parents had said. And I understood it. I really did. There is a particular kind of resentment that grows when you watch a sibling build a stable life while yours keeps changing. I could see how my parents' house might feel like the one thing she could claim that would never disappear. But understanding her did not make the arrangement fair. I said, Then if the house is your security, helping keep it should become part of your responsibility. She said, I never asked you to pay their mortgage. I replied, No, you just helped arrange it so you get the house while they kept asking me to pay for it. That is not the same thing. It became the same thing when you knew. Her voice sharpened. You're punishing me because Mom and Dad love me enough to understand I need help. I did not have a perfect response ready. I was too angry for one. What came out was, You did not lose a house. You lost the right to have me pay for it. Brianna stared at me. My mother said, That is cruel. Julian, who had been quiet for several minutes, leaned forward. He said, Can I ask something? My father looked annoyed, but Julian asked anyway. If the whole reason Brianna gets the house is that she needs it for security, why isn't she the one paying to keep it secure? No one answered immediately. Julian continued. I'm serious. Kobe already put $74,000 into it. You're saying Brianna needs the house more. Fine. Then why was Kobe still supposed to be responsible for the mortgage after you made that decision? My mother said, Because Kobe was in a better position to help. Julian nodded once. So the person who gets less is supposed to pay more because he can? My father said, That's an ugly way to describe family. Julian replied, I'm asking if it's accurate. That was the point when the room stopped feeling like my parents controlled it. Not because everyone suddenly took my side. They did not. One aunt still thought I was being punitive. Another relative said the house belonged to my parents and inheritance should never have been part of my thinking when I helped them. I agreed with part of that. I said, The first time I helped them, I was not buying the house. I know that. But they are the ones who repeatedly told me I was protecting something that would stay with me. Dad told me this place was how they would make some of it right. Then they changed the trust and did not tell me. My father said, Those were conversations, not promises. Fine. Then stop pretending my current boundary breaks a promise too. He stared at me. I added, There was no contract requiring me to keep paying either. My mother started crying again. She said, You make everything sound so calculated. I asked her, Why didn't you tell me when the trust changed? She said, We were trying to avoid exactly this. What does that mean? It means you would have been hurt. That's not a reason to hide it while asking me for money. We did not know what you would do. My father said, Teresa. But she kept going. We were afraid you would stop helping the minute you heard Brianna was getting the house, and we could not afford that. The room went very still. My mother seemed to realize immediately that she had said the part they had spent weeks avoiding. I did not raise my voice. I said, "You did not forget to tell me. You needed me uninformed." My father stepped in. "We needed to keep the family afloat." "No," I said. "You needed to keep this house afloat, and you decided my money was part of the plan whether I knew the whole plan or not." He said, "That is how families survive. The people who can carry more carry more." I looked at Brianna. "Until when?" I asked. "Until mom and dad die? Until she sells it? Until I've paid enough to earn the right to stop?" Brianna said, "Why do you keep saying I'm going to sell it?" That was when Julian spoke again. "Because you told me you might." Brianna's face changed completely. My mother looked from him to her. "What?" Julian said, "Months ago. She told me worst case. She could sell the house and finally start over." Brianna said, "That is being twisted." "Then untwist it," I said. She looked at me. I said if I had to. Someday. After mom and dad are gone. That does not mean I don't need security now. And again, she had a point. Wanting the option to sell a future asset did not automatically mean her need for security was fake. But it destroyed the way my parents had presented the decision, as if preserving this exact house for Brianna was some sacred family necessity that justified excluding me without a conversation. The house was security because it had value. And for almost a year, I had been subsidizing that value without being told I had been removed from it. My mother said, "This is getting ugly." I said, "It was ugly before tonight. Tonight is just the first time everyone has the same information." Then I told them my decision. I would not pay another mortgage payment. I would not pay the next property tax bill. I would not fund repairs. I would not pay insurance tied to the house. If my parents needed to ask me for any money for any reason in the future, the request needed to be written down so Elena and I could decide together. And I would not discuss the house financially unless Brianna was part of the discussion, because she was the person my parents had chosen to receive it. My mother said, "So this is your punishment?" "No," I said. "This is your arrangement without my subsidy." My father told me I was humiliating them in front of family. I reminded him that I had not invited the family. That was probably the coldest thing I said all night, and I do not regret it. We left shortly after that. Elena did not say much in the car. About 10 minutes into the drive, I asked, "Was that too far?" She said, "Which part?" "The papers." Julian bringing up what Brianna said. "All of it." She thought about it. "I think exposing the timeline was fair because they were using other people to pressure you with a false version of it. And the rest." "I think you were angry." "I was. I think some of what you said was harsher because you were angry." I waited. Then she said, "But your boundary was the same one we agreed on before we went in. That matters." That was not total validation, and I appreciated it more for that reason. The consequences were not dramatic in the way some people expected after hearing the story. No one was instantly foreclosed on. No one got arrested. No lawyer appeared with a perfect solution. The next mortgage payment still had to be dealt with. Brianna covered part of it, and my parents covered the rest after moving money around. The following month, she paid more. At one point, she contacted the lender about payment timing and possible short-term options because she did not have the same cash cushion I had been using. She hated it. I know because she told Celeste, and because she sent me one message that said, "I hope you're happy. I'm now paying for a house I do not even own yet." I read it twice. Then I replied, "That was my situation too, except I wasn't inheriting it." She did not answer. My parents cut expenses. They delayed a non-essential repair. My father started tracking the mortgage more closely instead of assuming the transfer would arrive from me. My mother stopped sending me sweet reminders 3 days before due dates because she understood those reminders were no longer attached to money. The first property tax issue after I stopped paying created another round of calls. My father asked if I would at least cover half because taxes affect the whole house, not just Brianna. I said no. He reminded me that I had grown up there. I said, "I'm grateful I grew up there. That does not make me financially responsible for it forever." He hung up on me. Some relatives thought I was right after seeing the timeline. Some thought I was right, but had handled it too harshly. A few never changed their minds. To them, elderly parents needing help ended the discussion. They believed that if I could afford to help, I should, regardless of who inherited what. I can understand that moral position even though I no longer accept it for myself. Celeste apologized for not realizing sooner that I had been kept in the dark. Julian apologized too. He admitted that when he first called me cold, he had assumed I had learned about the trust recently and immediately used the mortgage as leverage. Once he understood the 11-month overlap, he saw it differently. My parents did not give me a clean apology. My mother sent a long message about how sorry she was that the decision made me feel excluded. I told her that was not the issue. I asked whether she was sorry they continued requesting house money after changing the trust without telling me. She did not answer that question directly. My father said he had nothing to apologize for because he had done what he thought was necessary to keep everyone protected. That hurt, but it also simplified things. For the first time, I stopped treating lack of agreement as a problem I had to solve. Elena and I went low contact with my parents for a while. We did not make a dramatic announcement about it. We just stopped participating in the cycle where every call became an emergency and every emergency became a test of loyalty. We told them we would talk about ordinary family things. We would see them in limited settings. But money was off the table unless the request came in writing, and Elena and I agreed together. The house itself was completely off the table. That part was harder than I expected. I had always thought the painful thing would be losing the chance to inherit it. It was not. The painful thing was losing what the house meant in my head. For years, every time I sent money there, I told myself I was preserving something bigger than a structure. I was protecting my parents. I was protecting a piece of my childhood. I was making sure my daughter could still visit the place where I grew up. I was doing what a good son did. After the trust situation, I could not look at the house without thinking about invoices. The roof I paid for. The taxes. The transfer dates. The 11 months my parents knew something I did not. I hated that. I also had to admit something Elena had been too polite to say directly for years. I had used being the reliable one as part of my identity. It made me feel important. Every time I solved a crisis, I got to believe I was the steady son, the capable brother, the person who did not abandon family. That made it easier for my parents to manipulate me, but it also made it harder for me to stop, because stopping felt like losing a version of myself I was proud of. My parents did not create that part alone. I participated in it. That realization was uncomfortable because it meant I could not fix the problem just by blaming them. I had to change what I did the next time the phone rang. And there were next times. A minor repair. A higher utility bill. A request from my mother that started with, "I know you said the house is off limits, but this is different." Before all of this, I would have listened until the difference sounded convincing. Now I said, "If it is related to the house, call Brianna." My mother told me I sounded like a stranger. I said, "I'm trying not to become your emergency fund again." She did not like that answer. I let her dislike it. That was new for me. Elena did not instantly trust the change either. That is another part one think people skip when they tell stories about finally setting boundaries. The people around you do not automatically believe a new boundary just because you announced one. For years, Elena had watched me say, "This is the last time," and then make another exception because my father sounded stressed or my mother cried or Brianna had another problem. So after everything happened, Elena did not celebrate like we had won something. She watched. A month later, when my father called about the property tax and I said no without making Elena be the bad guy, she noticed. 2 months later, when my mother asked if I could just front money for a repair until Brianna could pay me back, I told her no before even bringing it to Elena. Not because Elena had ordered me to. Because the house boundary was already decided. That was when I think my wife started believing I actually meant it. We also rebuilt some of the habits we had let slide while my parents' finances kept invading our own. We reviewed our savings goals together again. We stopped treating every extra dollar as something that might need to be held in reserve for the next family crisis. I stopped waiting until after our daughter went to bed to mention money. There was no dramatic financial windfall. The $74,000 did not come back. That is probably gone in the practical sense. I can call it unfair. I can call it a painful education. I can call some of it a gift I regret, but none of those labels puts it back in our account. And I have to live with the fact that I chose to give a lot of it without insisting on clear terms. That is my part. My parents' part is that they knew my understanding of the situation was incomplete and chose not to correct it because my ignorance benefited them. Brianna's part is that she wanted the upside of being the protected child without wanting the financial responsibility that came with the protection she was asking for. We all have parts. The difference now is that I only pay for mine. Several months after the family meeting, my daughter came home with another drawing. It was a house. Kids draw houses constantly, so I doubt she meant anything profound by it. The roof was bright red. There were 4 windows, even though she had drawn only 1 floor. She put 3 stick figures in front and a smaller figure that was apparently our dog, even though it looked like a potato with legs. She went straight to the fridge and reached for one of the old magnets. It was the same crooked one that had been sliding sideways for years. She stuck the drawing up, stepped back, decided it was tilted, then left it tilted anyway. A few months earlier, Elena had cleared the bills and bank reminders off that fridge because she did not want our daughter watching money tension become part of the scenery in our home. Now there was just her drawing, a school calendar, and a grocery list. I stood there looking at the picture longer than she understood. For most of my adult life, when I thought about the family house, I pictured my parents' place. The creaky hallway. The kitchen cabinet. The roof I paid for. The mortgage I kept rescuing. I do not picture it first anymore. My parents still live there. Brianna is still the person set to inherit it. I do not know whether she will keep it forever or sell it someday. That is between the 3 of them now. I also do not know whether my relationship with my parents will ever return to what it was. I suspect it will not, because what I miss was partly built on me being useful in a way I am no longer willing to be. I lost money. I lost some closeness. I lost the comforting belief that the house I grew up in represented the same thing to all of us. What I did not lose was my marriage, my daughter's stability, or the right to decide where our money goes. When my mother texts me now, I can read the word honey without automatically reaching for a bank app. And the drawing on our fridge is still hanging crooked. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.